1 minute ago, in a crowded suburb west of Naples, the floor of an ordinary living room grew so hot that it began to blister paint-cracked tiles and push sulfur crystals up through the concrete. This isn't a house fire. It's heat from one of the world's most dangerous supervolcanoes, Campi Flegrei, forcing its way into people's homes. For years, official reports said the risk was under control. Now walls are warping, pipes are bursting, and entire apartment blocks are being abandoned. If the danger was underestimated here, what else is rising unseen beneath these streets? From the air, the Bay of Naples looks like a postcard. Ferries cut white trails across the water. Cruise ships sit at anchor, and pastel buildings climb the hills around the harbor. What most visitors never see is that just west of Naples, beyond the postcard skyline, the ground itself is a volcano, a vast, low caldera called Campi Flegrei, the burning fields. There is no dramatic cone, no single summit. Instead, craters, fumaroles, and hot springs are scattered between apartment blocks, highways, football fields, and shopping streets. The caldera is roughly 13 kilometers across. Inside its rim live hundreds of thousands of people in towns like Pozzuoli, Agnano, and Bagnoli, with the city of Naples pressing right up against its eastern edge. Streets, schools, and hospitals are literally built on the remains of past eruptions. In some places, the sea laps at the broken edge of old craters. In others, apartment towers stand where ancient lava once flowed. This is not wilderness. It is one of the most densely populated volcanic regions on Earth. Campi Flegrei earned its reputation long before modern cities existed. About 39,000 years ago, a colossal eruption blew out a huge volume of rock and ash, collapsing the ground into the sagging bowl that people now live in. Ash from that event fell across much of Europe and the eastern Mediterranean. Since then, dozens of smaller eruptions have punched their way through the weakened crust. In 1538, a brand new hill called Monte Nuovo rose in just a few days as fountains of ash and lava buried fields and villages. Historic accounts describe darkness at noon choking ash and homes cracking apart as the ground lifted and split. Even in quieter centuries, the caldera has never been truly still. The ground here rises and falls in slow pulses, a phenomenon known as bradyseism. In the 1980s, the center of Pozzuoli lifted more than a meter, cracking roads, warping docks, and forcing the evacuation of tens of thousands of residents. When the uplift eased, some people moved back, but not everyone. To this day, abandoned buildings and fenced-off lots are scattered among renovated blocks, physical reminders that the land underfoot can move without warning. Now, a new kind of unrest is creeping to the surface. In certain districts, pavements are warm even in winter. Thin curls of steam seep from drains and cracks. At vents like Pisciarelli and Solfatara pools boil and hiss, and yellow sulfur crusts grow thicker on the rocks each year. In some houses, residents have watched the same yellow and white crusts crawl up their walls and floors, turning their living rooms into unintentional laboratories. What used to be a distant geological story has become a problem inside people's homes. It is here in this crowded, restless landscape of flats, cafes, and fumaroles that the current crisis is unfolding. A supervolcano that once reshaped continents is now expressing itself in the most intimate way possible through the temperature of a child's bedroom floor, the crack in a kitchen tile, the quiet decision of a family to pack their belongings and never return. If this were just a landscape of hot springs and steam, Campi Flegrei would be another tourist postcard: thermal spas, wellness hotels, people soaking in warm pools. What makes the current situation terrifying is that the same heat and gas feeding those attractions are now forcing their way into places that were never meant to be part of the volcano at all. Over the past decade, measurements at vents like Pisciarelli have shown temperatures climbing well above the boiling point of water, pushing toward 130 degrees Celsius. Gas emissions have risen from a background trickle to thousands of tons of carbon dioxide per day. Those are abstract numbers until you see what they do at street level. Soil in some courtyards has become too hot for grass to survive. Patches of ground hiss with invisible steam. Concrete paths turn damp and white as minerals precipitate out of the vapor, leaving a crust that grows thicker every month. Inside certain buildings, the change is even more unsettling. Residents describe tiles that feel warm through the soles of their feet even in winter. Paint blisters and peels and swirls of yellow and white. Hairline cracks widen into jagged lines as floors heave and settle. In a few unlucky apartments, instruments have recorded floor temperatures above 40 degrees Celsius and carbon dioxide levels high enough to make people dizzy and short of breath. These are not dramatic explosive events. They are slow invasions pushing families out room by room until entire blocks are declared uninhabitable. All of this is happening on top of a ground that is literally rising. Bradyseism has lifted parts of Pozzuoli several tens of centimeters in recent years, enough to re-expose ancient Roman piers that were once submerged. Each pulse of uplift is accompanied by swarms of small earthquakes, most too weak to be felt, but clearly visible on seismograms. Together, the rising ground, the heating vents, and the increasing gas flow point to the same conclusion: pressure is building in a shallow system beneath a densely populated urban area. What worries many scientists most is the way this pressure might be stored and released. Studies suggest that a network of shallow reservoirs and fractures now channels hot fluids just a few kilometers below the surface. In such a system, failure does not require a towering column of magma marching toward the sky. It might only take a critical increase in gas pressure or a small change in rock strength for new fractures to rip open vents to appear under streets, or in the worst case, an eruption to burst through in a place that has never seen one before. On paper, official hazard maps focus on the red zone most at risk from ash pyroclastic flows and lava. In reality, the first victims of this unrest are already living far from any obvious crater in apartments where the enemy is not falling ash but rising heat. When a supervolcano starts to colonize basements and living rooms, it blurs the line between normal life and active crisis. That is why this situation feels so different from a distant hypothetical big eruption someday. For thousands of people around Campi Flegrei, the disaster has already begun, only it looks less like an explosion and more like a slow, relentless eviction. Behind every blistered wall and steaming courtyard at Campi Flegrei lies a dense web of instruments trying to keep up with what the volcano is doing. Scattered across the caldera are small white boxes and metal masts, seismometers, GPS stations, tilt meters, gas sensors, and thermal cameras. Together, they record thousands of measurements every day, turning an invisible underground system into lines and colors that scientists can read. The story those instruments tell is disturbing. GPS antennas bolted into pavements and bedrock show that parts of the caldera floor have been rising steadily, in some places by several centimeters over just a few years. The pattern is not random. The strongest uplift centers beneath Pozzuoli and nearby neighborhoods, the same areas where homes have felt the greatest heat. That uplift means the shallow crust is being pushed from below as if something is inflating inside. Seismometers add another layer. Most of the time, they register a background hiss of tiny earthquakes too small for people to feel. During pulses of unrest, that hiss becomes a rattle as hundreds of microquakes occur in clusters just a few kilometers below the surface. Their depths and locations trace out zones where rock is breaking and adjusting, often beneath known fumaroles and hot springs. These are not the deep, powerful events of a large magma body forcing its way upward, but shallow fractures opening and closing in stressed, heated rock. Gas sensors and sampling stations tell a complementary story. Chemists measure the ratios of carbon dioxide, sulfur dioxide, hydrogen sulfide, and steam coming out of vents and bubbling pools. Over time, they have seen carbon dioxide emissions climb to several thousand tons per day, a sign that large volumes of gas are escaping from depth. Changes in gas composition suggest that magma and hot fluids are interacting with groundwater in a complex, evolving way. Temperature probes at vents like Pisciarelli and Solfatara show sustained increases, with some emission points now well above 120 degrees Celsius. When hot acidic vapor percolates into the foundations of buildings, it corrodes concrete, eats metal, and deposits mineral crusts that slowly choke drains and crack floors. Recently, scientists have used advanced techniques, sometimes including machine learning, to re-examine years of seismic and deformation data. By training algorithms to pick out patterns too subtle for human eyes, they have identified ring-shaped zones of micro-earthquakes and deformation that seem to outline structural weaknesses in the caldera. One of these rings wraps around the area where ground uplift, gas emissions, and building damage are most intense. This suggests that pressure is not spread evenly beneath the caldera, but is concentrating along pre-existing faults and fracture systems. Those structures may guide future failures, whether they take the form of new vents opening larger earthquakes or something more dramatic. All of this information flows into a central volcano observatory. Here, banks of monitors display live graphs and maps. Software combines GPS and satellite radar into colored images of uplift. Seismic traces scroll past in tight bundles punctuated by spikes when swarms hit. Gas readings update in near real time. When any parameter crosses a threshold, a jump in deformation, a sharp increase in quake rate, a sudden change in gas ratio, automated alerts flag the anomaly and a human team evaluates whether it signals a new phase of unrest. On the civil side, emergency managers translate this technical picture into alert levels and hazard zones. The area around Campi Flegrei is divided into colored sectors on official maps, zones where ash fall would be most intense zones at risk, from pyroclastic flows zones where buildings might be damaged simply by the ground rising or cracking. For the people living on top of the hotspots, there are additional concerns: soil gas entering basements, toxic pockets in low-lying rooms, floors becoming unsafe. Authorities install gas alarms in some homes, mark evacuation routes, and run drills where schools and hospitals practice moving people quickly to safer areas. Yet the monitoring network is under constant strain. Instruments are exposed to the very forces they are meant to measure: high temperatures, corrosive gases, ground deformation. Some stations fail and go offline for weeks until technicians can repair them. Funding cuts and bureaucratic delays make it difficult to expand coverage or replace aging equipment. The result is a patchwork system that can detect large trends but sometimes misses local extremes, like the one apartment where heat and gas happen to focus. Warning systems, too, have hard limits. Scientists can see that uplift is accelerating, that earthquakes are clustering at shallower depths, that vents are hotter and more vigorous. They can raise the alert level and advise evacuations of specific buildings or districts. But they still cannot say exactly when or where the next serious failure will occur. Will it be another house slowly rendered unlivable, a swarm that cracks roads and sewers but then fades, or the opening stage of an eruption? The instruments can narrow the range of possibilities. They cannot close it. That gap between what can be measured and what can be predicted is where decisions must be made. Authorities have to choose when to empty a building, when to close a street, when to move tens of thousands of people out of the highest risk zones. Every false alarm has a social and economic cost. Every delay carries a risk that the volcano, not the planners, will dictate the schedule. The most shocking thing about Campi Flegrei today is that the damage is not confined to maps or hazard reports. It is already etched into people's homes. In some apartment blocks, entire stairwells stand empty, lights off, mail piling up on the floor. Doors are sealed with official tape. Inside floors are mottled with white and yellow crusts. Tiles have buckled, leaving sharp ridges underfoot. A sweet metallic smell hangs in the air where hot, mineral-rich vapor has seeped through foundations, cooled and solidified on walls, pipes, and wiring. These buildings were not hit by an eruption. They were slowly taken apart from below. For the families who once lived there, the disaster arrived in small steps. First came the warmth underfoot, easily dismissed as bad insulation. Then the strange stains that spread in corners and along skirting boards. Pets refused to sleep in certain rooms. Children woke up with headaches. Carbon dioxide sensors, once installed, showed levels spiking to dangerous concentrations in ground floor bedrooms and basements. Eventually, engineers measured temperatures and gas levels that exceeded safety limits. One by one, apartments were declared uninhabitable. Residents were given days to gather what they could carry and leave the rest behind. Outside, the impact ripples through the community. Shops near the hottest zones see fewer customers. Landlords struggle to rent out flats with visible cracks and discolored floors. Property values in some streets plunge, while others just outside the worst affected areas rise as people look for safer addresses. Insurance policies often exclude damage caused by volcanic activity, leaving homeowners to pay for repairs themselves or walk away from mortgages they can no longer justify. For those who stay, everyday life becomes a compromise. Windows kept open to vent gas parts of the house, closed off furniture rearranged to avoid the hottest spots. Public infrastructure fares little better. Each new pulse of uplift and seismic activity leaves its mark on roads and utilities. Pavements buckle as the ground swells. Manhole covers tilt and asphalt splits into jagged seams. In some places, work crews repair a crack in the street only to see a new vent of steam and gas open a short distance away weeks later. Pipes buried in shifting ground leak or rupture, cutting off water or sewage services. Retaining walls tilt and small landslides spill onto side roads. Emergency vehicles must navigate around temporary closures even on calm days. Authorities are not blind to these changes. Civil protection agencies regularly update risk maps and designate yellow and red zones areas where structural damage or future eruptions are most likely. They organize drills in schools and hospitals, timing how long it takes to move patients and children to safer areas. Gas detectors are installed in some public buildings and homes. Warning sirens are tested. Information campaigns urge residents to recognize signs of soil gas in enclosed spaces and to report cracks, warmth, or unusual smells to local officials. Yet the response is constantly racing behind the problem. Funding limitations mean some monitoring stations remain broken longer than anyone would like. Bureaucratic processes delay the reinforcement or relocation of critical facilities. Families displaced from hot or cracked buildings sometimes spend months in temporary accommodation, unsure whether they will ever return home. Political leaders must balance volcanic risk against housing shortages, unemployment, and public fatigue. If they push too hard on evacuations or restrictions, they risk backlash. If they do too little, they risk being blamed if conditions worsen. The net result is a city living in a kind of uneasy truce with the volcano. Every repair is provisional. Every plan assumes that streets and buildings will remain usable just long enough. People adapt because they have to commuting past steaming vents, hanging laundry above warm courtyards, sending children to schools built on slowly rising ground. The question no one can answer is how long this balance can hold. At what point does a pattern of manageable damage tip into something that demands mass relocation or emergency evacuation on a scale not seen here in living memory? That uncertainty is itself a consequence. It erodes trust, complicates long-term decisions, and keeps a quiet layer of anxiety running beneath daily routines. The volcano does not need to erupt to change lives. At Campi Flegrei, it is already doing so, one crack, one hot floor, and one abandoned doorway at a time. Inside the monitoring centers that watch Campi Flegrei, the numbers and graphs have triggered more than alarms. They have reopened an argument that has been simmering for years. What exactly is the volcano doing, and how close is it to a change that no one can reverse? One group of scientists looks at the rising ground, the hotter vents, and the damaged buildings and sees a dangerous pattern. In their view, the shallow crust under the caldera has been pushed to a critical state. Hot fluids and gas are circulating just a few kilometers below a crowded urban region. The rock above is already fractured and weakened by past eruptions and centuries of uplift. To these researchers, the houses that are slowly being abandoned are not isolated accidents. They are early signs that the system is storing energy in a way that could one day be released suddenly. They argue that the safest assumption is that Campi Flegrei is edging closer to an eruption, or at least to stronger seismic and hydrothermal events than anything seen here in living memory. Others read the same data in a less apocalyptic way. They point out that Campi Flegrei has gone through multiple episodes of uplift and gas increase in the last century without erupting. Each time, the ground eventually subsided again, and the swarm of small quakes faded. From this perspective, the current crisis is serious, but not necessarily a prelude to a large eruption. The volcano might be releasing pressure in small, messy ways through vents, hotspots, and building damage rather than saving it all for a single explosive event. For this camp, the greatest dangers are ongoing hydrothermal accidents, local collapses, and structural failures, not a sudden citywide catastrophe. Between these poles lies a difficult reality. Both sides agree that the system is hotter, more pressurized, and more connected to the surface than it was a few decades ago. They disagree on what that implies for the next 10 or 20 years. New research has proposed that gas and fluid can move through the caldera like steam in a coffee pot, building pressure in shallow reservoirs and bursting through weak spots without the clear, deep magma signals that older models expect. If that is true, relying only on classic eruption precursors might leave authorities blind to more subtle but still dangerous failures. At the same time, advances in technology complicate the picture. Improved satellite radar, dense seismic networks, and even machine learning have revealed ring-shaped patterns of deformation and microquakes that were invisible before. Supporters say these tools give us an unprecedented view into the breathing of the volcano and can highlight zones where stress is concentrating long before disaster hits. Skeptics worry that more detail does not automatically mean more certainty. The more wiggles and flashes scientists see on their screens, the greater the temptation to connect them into a story that may not be correct. False alarms erode public trust. Missed signals can cost lives. There is also the question of how to communicate this complex situation to the people who live on top of it. Volcanologists speak in probabilities and confidence levels. They talk about scenarios, not predictions. Politicians and residents, however, want clear answers. Should we evacuate or stay? Where should we build new housing? How much money should we spend reinforcing structures in a place that might not see a major eruption for centuries? The more uncertain the science appears, the harder it is to justify expensive disruptive measures before a visible crisis forces action. Economic and social pressures weigh heavily on the debate. Campi Flegrei sits in a region that depends on tourism, ports, and industry. Declaring large areas unfit for development or ordering mass relocations would have enormous consequences. Yet doing nothing allows more people and infrastructure to accumulate in harm's way. Insurance companies quietly adjust their policies. Banks consider the long-term value of properties in hot zones. For many families, the choice is not between living on a volcano or living somewhere else. It is between staying with what they can afford or moving to a future they cannot pay for. In conversations with residents, a quieter kind of debate emerges. Some people trust the scientists and believe that if there were a serious immediate danger, they would be told. Others suspect that authorities are downplaying the risk to avoid panic and protect the local economy. Social media amplifies every rumor and every alarmist headline. Videos of steaming vents and cracked floors circulate without context. Reassuring press conferences compete with dramatic amateur footage. The result is a confusing mix of fear, denial, and fatigue. All of this leaves the region trapped in a difficult space. The volcano clearly is not asleep. The damage already visible proves that. But its next move remains uncertain. Should plans and budgets be built around the assumption of a slow, manageable crisis that unfolds over decades? Or should leaders act as if a much more abrupt change is possible, even if they cannot say when? For now, the best answer scientists can offer is that the risk is real and growing even if the timeline is blurred. They can map the weakest zones, identify the most vulnerable neighborhoods, and suggest priorities for reinforcement and monitoring. They can describe the physical limits that nature will respect. What they cannot do is remove the uncomfortable truth at the heart of the debate. Campi Flegrei is a huge, complex system that does not care about political cycles or human schedules. It will continue to heat, crack, and breathe in its own time. The only choice left to the people who live above it is how seriously to take that fact before the next change arrives. On a quiet evening around the Bay of Naples, it is easy to imagine that Campi Flegrei is just a backdrop. Lights shimmer on the water. Traffic hums along the seafront, and the smell of food drifts from open windows. The low hills that hide the caldera blend into the city like any other piece of landscape. For many people, the volcano exists only as a word on a hazard map or a name in the news when small earthquakes shake the dishes. But beneath the streets, the story is different. The ground is slowly rising, pushed from below. Hot fluids and gas are seeking paths of least resistance. In some places, those paths happen to pass under apartment blocks, schools, and shops. The homes already abandoned because of heat and gas leaks are warnings carved into concrete. They show what happens when the volcano's shallow system and human infrastructure occupy the same space. Even without ash in the sky or lava in the streets, a supervolcano can quietly make parts of a city unlivable. The truth is that no one can say exactly how this unrest will end. Campi Flegrei might continue to pulse and breathe for decades, forcing the evacuation of more buildings and neighborhoods but never producing a major eruption. Or pressure could cross a threshold, triggering stronger earthquakes, sudden hydrothermal blasts, or an eruption that opens a new vent among homes and roads. The physics of hot rock and pressurized fluids mean that once a critical point is reached, events can move faster than any committee budget or plan. Because the volcano will not wait for a convenient moment, the only time available to prepare is now, while the damage is still mostly local and the crisis still feels slow. That preparation is not only about sirens and evacuation routes, it is about reinforcing structures in the most at-risk areas, relocating essential services out of the hottest zones, improving and maintaining monitoring networks, and giving residents clear information so they can recognize danger in their own homes. It is also about accepting that some places may never again be safe for permanent housing, no matter how familiar they feel. In the end, Campi Flegrei is a reminder that ancient does not mean harmless. The same system that once produced one of the largest eruptions in Europe's history is now writing new messages in cracked tiles and warm floors. Those messages say that the caldera is active, connected to the surface, and capable of change. What people and institutions choose to do with that knowledge will decide how many lives are disrupted, how many can be protected, and how many stories will be told from these streets after the next chapter of this volcano's history is written.